You might be wondering if separation could be a benefit to you and your unfaithful spouse, so that you can heal in a good way, in a healthy way. That idea is out there, and I do know there are people who have tried it, but you might be wondering if it's good for you. So in just a moment, let's talk about that a little bit, pros and cons, and if you do choose to separate, what would be some good strategies and boundaries to have in place. So stay tuned. So if you are in that situation as a betrayed spouse and you're trying to figure out, is separation a positive thing, a negative thing? How should I manage this? Let's just talk about some pros and cons real quick. Okay, I'll start with the good stuff. Let's start with a pro. I have seen through both clients and in my Facebook group that some people have had a positive experience with separation because it allowed them the space they needed to grieve. Their grieving was intense. It was hard for them to manage their emotions, and it was becoming really hard on their spouse, their unfaithful spouse. So having that space and to be able to cry by yourself and to scream and yell to nothing by yourself and to get it out of your system so that you're not hurting your spouse in the process, that actually has been a positive for some folks that I know. A negative could be that, we betrayed spouses experience a great deal of anxiety and fear, especially when it comes to whether our spouse is still in contact with the affair partner. Having them with us helps us feel a little safer and can lower anxiety, because if they're with us, they're less likely to be in contact with the affair partner. So separation could trigger that anxiety and make it a lot worse, right? That's a negative. If you don't know, if they're free to do what they want and they're not staying in your home, that can make your anxiety a lot worse. Another pro in this could be that it will allow your unfaithful spouse a chance to do some really heavy-duty therapy on their own, to have a chance to really think about and contemplate the ramifications of their choice to have the affair. And I don't know, maybe in some cases determine what they really want, so that they're not having to pour a lot of energy into helping you feel better because they're not around. Instead, they can just focus on themselves and put all that energy into them. That could be a positive. And the same would go for you. If you're a betrayed spouse, you're not so worried about protecting their feelings all the time. Your energy can go into just healing yourself. So we'll balance that off with a negative. Funding two households is expensive. It's expensive. And if your spouse actually moves out and finds a lease somewhere, a 6-month lease, and then they decide they want to come home, that's another expense, breaking a lease. So there's a financial component here to consider as well. And of course, then I'm going to wrap the kids up in that too. If you have children and you do a trial separation, that can be very confusing for kids. So there are just a lot to think about. I'll also say, if you do this, it can be challenging to know when they should come home. I've got clients going through that right now, actually doing separations. Is it safe to let them come home? Should I wait longer? How do I know? So when you get yourself in that situation where they're living somewhere else or separated from you as you heal through this betrayal trauma, knowing when to let them come home can be challenging. So those are just some things to think about, okay? So it's important, if you choose to do this, to have very clear boundaries with one another. Both of you have to have boundaries. Y'all need to sit down and talk about, is this a separation as you work on the marriage? In other words, is there going to be a boundary set that, yes, you are separated temporarily, but you will still go to marriage counseling, you will be working toward a healthy marriage? Or is this a separation because your spouse doesn't know what they want anymore? And you want to be separated so they can figure their junk out, and knowing that they will most likely still be in contact with the affair partner? Is there still a boundary in place that there is no contact with the affair partner? And do they understand that? How are they being held accountable for that? Do you still have access to their phone? Is there some type of software put on their phone that they agree to, that you can see what they're doing? What are your boundaries? Are you still going to have sex? Is physical contact still allowed? Are you going to go on dates? What's the expectation there? Are you going to go on a date once a week? And what's your time limit? I think that's important too. I think even an unfaithful spouse may not want an indefinite separation. They want to know you're going somewhere with this, right? And you might want to know the same thing. Where are you headed? What's your time frame? Those things need to be established before a separation takes place. I think that's important that both of you are on the same page so that there's not further hurt and damage down the road, misunderstandings that can make this not a healthy thing to do for both of you, if that makes sense. So consider that, okay? What are your boundaries? Go through those pros and cons, and be intentional about where you're headed. What's the goal here? If you are going to separate, where do you hope to be where are you trying to get to? As a coach, coaching and counseling is a little bit different. Coaching is all about moving forward. How are we going forward? I would ask you, if you're my client, I would say, okay, so if you're doing this trial separation, what's your end goal? Where both of you, I'm not talking individual goal, I'm talking as a couple, where do you want to be on the other side of this? Because that's going to determine the boundaries you set to get there, and the steps you take to get there, if that makes sense. If the end goal is not to save the marriage, then that's going to look very different than if the end goal is to have a healthy marriage, right? So ask yourself those questions, set those boundaries, be intentional. If you're looking for a coach to guide you through that, schedule a free call with me. It's right below. The link is below. Lots of freebies below too. Make sure you grab those, as well as subscribe if you like what you see. But either way, see a counselor, schedule that appointment with me, work with me, whatever. But be intentional. If you need somebody to help you walk you through that, definitely work with a professional. But those are the things I really, really encourage you to think about. You're not going to want to separate without doing this in a healthy way, because if it's not done in a healthy way, it actually could damage your relationship further. And I don't want that for you. Okay, be intentional. Okay, think through these things. Work with your spouse. If your goal is to have a healthy marriage on the other side, make sure your spouse is working with you on this, okay? Make sure you're going over those boundaries together. You're really being intentional about your next steps as a couple. All right? Think that through and see where you land.